with the unveil of the Final Fantasy VII Remake that has been long awaited from fans. We all couldn't wait to get our hands on it, whether you've played the original or not. If you're at least into Square Enix's JRPG franchises, then you definitely had your interest peaked. Coming from my own perspective, while I've never played Final Fantasy VII, the original on the PlayStation 1, or any ports of it onto future consoles, I have indeed played other Final Fantasy games. From 10, 12, and 15 to World of Final Fantasy and Type 0, I am definitely a fan of the franchise. When Final Fantasy VII Remake was unveiled, I had my doubts. Felt that this game was never going to come to fruition, taking into account of the fact that Final Fantasy 15 had not come out for, well, over a decade since its prior announcement as Final Fantasy 13 Versus. Especially when the game was announced that it was going to be an episodic journey and that the first part of the remake was actually going to be Midgard entirely, I was even more skeptical. Come 2019 though, gameplay was unveiled as well as a release date, and my doubts were at ease, but I was still skeptical. The game looked beautiful, but coming from someone who was mixed on Final Fantasy 15, while I loved the presentation of that game and the open world aspect of it, I wasn't entirely a fan of the way the fighting mechanics were performed as well as the story unfolding. Now, Final Fantasy VII is only focusing on 1/3 of the game's story, so for them to flesh that out into an entire game, well, anyone would have their worries in that regard. I'm happy to report, though, that as soon as you install that game and open the title screen to that wonderful Final Fantasy title music, and you see the Buster Sword in the ground, and you're ready to press new game, I'm sure for many players that was a wave of nostalgia, and for those who've never played the original, it was a wave of excitement. Delving into the game, you can tell that a lot of care was put into the presentation of everything. Just watching Cloud walk as the light reflects off of the Buster Sword from the back is beautiful. Everything, the details of the environment, the facial structure, it's just so well done that you can tell that the team at Square Enix poured their heart into this. Whether it's at night or during the day, the game looks incredible. Midgard looks like a lively city, and that there's so much going on. It kind of has a cyberpunk feel to it, but it's still its own iteration of its world. Now, if you've never played the original, like me, then the story is going to be completely new to you. The story itself revolves around Cloud Strife, a mercenary that is an ex-soldier for Midgard's military. During Cloud's travels, he runs into a cast of characters that basically get him riled up into a plot where the world itself, Earth, is being drained of its energy, mana, and it is up to Cloud and his friends to put a stop to it. That is essentially the game. I won't delve too much into it from there because I prefer to go into games without knowing too much, and I want you to do the same if you've never played it. What I will say is that I was pleasantly taken into a journey from Cloud's perspective. Cloud as a character at first is hard-hitted and doesn't really come off as likable, but over time you learn to actually enjoy Cloud's presence, and playing as him and his personality comes to fruition as he gains more of a bond with these other characters. Whether it's Tifa, Barrett, or Aerith, you learn to really like all of the characters here. And because the game takes the Midgard section and fleshes it out into a whole introduction sequence for the game's world, all of these characters are given enough development and background information for you to develop a positive opinion of them. Barrett, for example, from what I hear from people who've played the original game, say that he was over the top and obnoxious. But in this game, while he is definitely still obnoxious at times, he's given it enough background to show how his sentimental side and give him his own personality duality. Tifa and Aerith are done the same way. And during the course of this adventure, you grow with all of these characters more and more. And as you grow with them, so does Cloud. And overall, it's a dynamic that is beautifully done by Square Enix. Midgard itself is its own character, and each district you go to is its own side of a personality. And the lower slums, you definitely get a feel for these people. The government does not care about them, and because they're in the lower districts, they'll always be looked at as bottom feeders. Well, when you make your way to the top, you can see all of the technology and where the money is being put into. It gives the world its own hierarchy system, and has its own reflections of society in the real world. As the story unfolds, however, I will say that it can drag on in a lot of different segments, such as when you're in the sewers or navigating the pathways to other districts, such as from District 6 to 7 and vice versa. The game has to drag out its time to give you more of a bang for your buck in terms of the length of the story, but by doing so, a lot of these sequences are dragged out. It's not unpleasant, but it does feel like the game is trying its best to just hold your attention, even though it knows it probably should be wrapping up this sequence and moving on to the next. In terms of the gameplay, from someone who's never played the original, but I am accustomed to the turn-based combat system of traditional Final Fantasy games, I will say that this game has the best combat system that I've seen implemented by Square Enix since its attempts at real-world combat. What I mean by that is from Final Fantasy 13 to 14 and 15, obviously 14 is an MMO. The game opts to not just do traditional turn-based combat, but it put its own spin on it, especially with 15. In terms of Final Fantasy 15, it was a completely real-time combat system in an open world. You could move around freely and do your own moves at your own pace. Well, this game is that. However, it's still turn-based in the fact that you can switch between characters and pick their special moves. At first, it takes some getting used to because you have to learn how to multitask with a multitude of characters. But as you get the hang of it and as they grow in their skills and abilities, and you learn to jump between the right character at different points in a battle accordingly, it flows so nicely that it feels strategic yet archaic in a good way. I love the dynamic of the fighting system. I'll be fighting as Cloud, slashing my sword, and as I see that gauge meter, I will unleash an attack. And while Cloud is executing that attack, I'll switch to Barret as fast as I can and fire as many shots as I can at the enemy, filling up his gauge and unleashing his attack. While at the same time, Aerith has shot enough of her magic powers, or whatever you want to call it, at the enemy as well to fill up her gauge, so I unleash a thunder spell. All of this flows, so it's a mixture of a little bit of turn-based, probably 1/3 of turn-based, and two-thirds of real-time combat. I love how it's been implemented by Square Enix, and I want to see them utilize this in whatever future Final Fantasy games that they do put out, hopefully in Final Fantasy 16. I feel that it gives enough to traditional fans while also evolving the franchise forward. The mana system, mana, however you want to say it, is the best that I've seen done. The menus are not overcomplicated. They're actually pretty simplistic. They're laid out very nicely and they're easy to follow. So when you upgrade your character, you know what you're doing. Applying different orbs to upgrade the weapons and skills of your characters or their attributes is also very simple to follow. And overall, it's actually quite enjoyable to take some time, pause the game, and rearrange the orbs and your attributes for each of your characters accordingly so you can strategize a bit better. Maybe you don't want Aerith to be your only mage. Maybe in a way, Tifa is going to be a mage as well with high magic points, for example. Exploring the world is also very fun to do when the game chooses to open it up. However, it is a bit inconsistent because there will be times when the game basically sets the stage for you to explore freely within one part of it and perform side quests. But if you try to advance the story, which in a way you always feel like you should be doing, you're quickly prompted to make sure that you've done everything you've wanted to do, because moving forward you're going to go into probably about 5 to 10 hours without being able to do anything else but play the story. So the game goes from being linear to open sandbox and switching back and forth, which can give you a pace that is inconsistent at times and not as fun. Maybe you want to take a break from the main story. Maybe you're a bit stuck or it's dreading on and you want to switch over to some side quests, which I will say I've never been a fan of the way that the Final Fantasy franchise implements side quests in terms of not being as fleshed out, in my opinion. But I will also add that I really didn't try out the side quest too much in this game, so I will hold judgment until further notice. Overall, however, I wouldn't say that I'm reviewing the game, more so I'm sharing my thoughts from the perspective of somebody who has never played Final Fantasy VII. The Final Fantasy VII Remake is an incredible game. It is a ton of fun and I recommend it to anybody who likes JRPGs. And if you don't, you should still give it a shot. This is one of the most coherent and clear stories that Square Enix has put out, in my opinion. It's not too confusing and it's pretty easy to follow up until that ending. And with that said, I'm going to, on my own personal scale, I give Final Fantasy VII a 9 out of 10. This game was great, and I look forward to its further entries. Thank you for listening, and if you are a Final Fantasy VII fan who's played the originals and you have disagreements with my opinions in the remake, I respect it, I understand. Go ahead and comment them. I'd love to hear other opinions. Thank you for watching.